Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here, the host of the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where I talk with CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs of all kinds of companies and organizations like YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard, Landing Tree, OpenTable, Act Software, and many more. I'm also the co-founder of Rise 25, where we help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. And first, before we get started, I want to give a shout out to Fran Biederman-Gross, who introduced me to our guest, Justin Breen. She's the host of the Drive Profit with Purpose podcast, and definitely go check it out on iTunes. You'll enjoy it. And I'm excited to talk to Justin. Justin is a consummate connector. He's someone that I connected with originally through EO and EO Accelerator program, which we're both involved in. He's the CEO of the PR firm BrEpic Communications, and author of the best-selling book, Epic Business, 30 Secrets to Build Your Business Exponentially and Give you the freedom to live the life that you want. He's hardwired to seek out and create viral, thought-provoking stories that the media craves. He actually started his background in journalism and now has a PR firm. So we're going to talk about that transition. And as I mentioned, an amazing consummate networker who, like me, believes in the power of introductions. So we'll get into his philosophy around that. But first, before we get started, if you've been listening for a while, you know how passionate we are about podcasting and content marketing that up-levels your network. And I am a podcasting evangelist for the last 10 years. I've been saying everyone should start a podcast, because even if no one's listening, you will derive tremendous benefits to your life. It's like a Swiss Army knife, a tool that accomplishes so much at once. It can and will lead to great clients, referrals, strategic partnerships. It is networking and business development. It's personal and professional development, which doubles as content marketing. And we can't personally help everyone to start and run a podcast, but I can try and inspire everyone to get involved in this medium in one way or the other, whether you're a guest or whether you're behind the mic. On either side of the mic, I highly recommend it. So to learn more, go to rise25media.com, or you can also email us at support@rise25media.com. All right, Justin. So I'm excited to talk to you. And, first of all, let's start right here. You were going down a journalism path. My father was a journalist. I studied journalism in high school, was editor of my high school newspaper. And you made kind of a right turn at some point around 2017, decide to go from one side to the other side. What inspired that?
Yeah, so John, I really appreciate you having me on this awesome podcast. I feel like you and I have very similar brains, and I'm really excited to talk to you. I was a journalist for 20 years. I created my entire business model based on how PR firms annoyed me for 20 years. So everybody laughs at that, especially folks at your level. But that's why I've built a global successful company in 3 years. But
well, because you knew how annoying it is to be on the other side when you get these pitches that are just completely not attuned to what you write about, what you focus on. I'm sure you got plenty of them.
That's 100% correct. So as a journalist, you get hundreds of these press releases every single day from people you don't know that are totally useless. And so my firm creates actual stories similar to what I did as a journalist. It becomes a link on the client's website under news or blog. So it looked like a story you see in the San Francisco Chronicle or the LA Times, the Chicago Tribune, and the New York Times. And then I take that link and pitch it to media locally, regionally, nationally, and internationally. If media is interested, I put them in touch with the client contact. So it works for any business size, any location, any vertical. It's just the person in charge or the contact has to be a visionary who looks at things as investments, not costs. If someone says, what do you cost, what do you charge? It's an automatic disqualifier. Those people go away pretty much immediately. And what's left is this giant international global incubator of geniuses and constantly introducing each other for mutual gain. And the byproduct is I'm constantly getting intros to companies around the world that want to hire my firm. So business is booming, and it just keeps getting better and better and better because my network keeps growing and growing and growing every single day.
And were you doing this kind of networking when you were a journalist?
It's a good question. So I had a giant network as a journalist, in the range of 25 to 30,000 followers on social media. But it was other journalists or sources for stories.
Right.
Since starting a business, that has changed from, sources or media contacts, which I still have, but it's more of like entrepreneurs or CEOs or founders or, communications coordinator or marketing heads. And most of my day is talking to people like you on a global level. It's really fun. And I just, it has nothing to do with business, but everything to do with business. And then someone will say something obscure, and then I'll be like, oh, I know someone in Australia or Guatemala that thinks exactly the same way. And then I'll just connect them. I don't write anything down. It's just all in my head. And it's kind of interesting to see that that's actually what my number one superpower is, with PR being 1A. And then I just keep doubling down on those and enjoying my life. It's a lot of fun.
I'm always curious about people who have to change their network. And partially, I think, because I moved around a lot as a kid. My father was a journalist, and journalism then and now can be a fickle business. You move from place to place as you move your way up. And so, we moved to new cities, new towns, and I always had to rebuild my network in my elementary school, in a sense. For you had different sports beats. You were with different papers, so it was different local communities that you were covering. Was it hard when you started the business to completely build your network over from scratch?
Hard is an understatement. And just as background, how and why I started the company, and I'll say this as quickly as possible. So February 10th, 2017, I was working full-time as a journalist. Just due to cutbacks, my job salary got cut in half. Two other people got fired that day. And I was very fortunate that I wasn't terminated. My salary was cut in half. So next couple of weeks, tried to find a full-time job. Couldn't find a job because, finding a job's a nightmare. On April 16th, 2017, I incorporated while I was still working full-time at a reduced salary. And then no one knew that I had started this business. So next 6 weeks, I reached out to 5,000 people to get my first 5 clients. So 1 out of 1,000, 999 no's for every yes. Got the 5th client around June 1st, 2017, resigned from my full-time job the next day. And then a couple days later, Robert Feeder, who's the top media columnist in the Midwest, did a story that I had started my own firm. So hard is an understatement to find 5 clients based on, reaching out to 5,000 people. It was probably more than 5,000 people, but just sounds better, 5,000 for 5. But basically,
because over 5,000 sounds kind of desperate, but 5,000 is reasonable.
5,
Yeah.
and but I mean, again, we thought I had a giant network and still do, and it just keeps growing. But yeah, I just reached out to everyone in my network where it was like it wouldn't be a conflict of interest of like, oh, this person's still working full time and you're starting a company. So
was it weird going to suddenly becoming an entrepreneur after having been a journalist for so many years? Did you feel like a part of your identity changed or anything like that?
Of course. Yeah. And I think so. I help a lot of journalists who are on their way out or have left. I've helped so many start their own businesses, whether it's PR or something else, because journalists identify with being a journalist. They don't really, this is based on my experience in talking to, hundreds of journalists. They don't really know how to do anything else. So yes, weird, scary, stress-filled, not sleeping. So like everybody's like, oh, you're doing so well now and your business is thriving, or, it's incredible. But like, you didn't see me 2 a.m. with 0 clients, 0 revenue, where I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. We live in the North Shore of Chicago. You can see from my backyard, it's pretty nice backyard. So it's not cheap to live here. And it's like, well, so I had to make this work, and, it's entrepreneur life. If you can't accept overwhelming failure, horrible ups and downs, the worst anxiety you've ever felt, then this is not the life for you. But once you get through all that and you get through the bottom and, rock bottom, you get to this place where, you just find this incredible freedom of time, freedom of money, freedom of relationships. It's just an incredible life. And I'm so fortunate that I went through all those ups and downs to get to this place where I'm at now.
Now, it's a big shift to go from being pitched to having to pitch others, to convince others to write about your clients, because your clients are not going to stick around for too long if they're not getting stories written about them. What was that like, having to go out and, sing for your supper, so to speak, go out and, talk to journalists and get them to write the story that you want them to write? Did it take a while to figure out the process that you use now?
Yeah, so when I first started, I was basically doing anything I could to get a client. Anything you would think of a PR firm doing, a traditional PR firm doing. But I figured out pretty quickly within the first couple of months is that what I really like to do is write stories and then pitch them to media. And so I just dumped everything else and just started focusing on this simple process, redefining it, refining it, raising rates, weeding out all the nonsense. And in terms of why companies hire my firm from a journalistic perspective, there's two reasons. One, I know what a good story is. As a journalist, I wrote 2 to 3 stories on deadline every single day. So I can talk to someone for an hour. 55 minutes will be totally useless to what anyone cares about, but in 5 minutes, I'll be like, oh, there's the story, and I just weave everything around that, and then add what's called the news peg, meaning why is it a story now? So like you wrote a book, which I did, and then, or you're running across the United States, or you have a new company that launched, or you created this new technology. That's one reason. And then the other reason is because I have all these amazing media contacts. To our point, your question before, I had this giant network, and I'm not going to send the media contacts that I have a bad story. So for me, because I was a journalist for 20 years, and media for the most part are high fact finders, so if I do send them something and they don't know who I am, they're going to look up and be like, oh, this guy worked at DNA Info, which is a very highly reputable news site in Chicago and New York. And they're going to be like, oh, this guy actually knows what he's doing, as opposed to like a PR flag that has never been a journalist and is clearly just doing something to help the client as opposed to help the journalist and the client.
Right. So talk a little bit about some of tell us a story about some of the clients or one of the clients that you've worked with and what that process was like, from, especially if it was like kind of at first blush seemed like maybe a less interesting, more boring type of client. How do you find that story? Tell us a story about, interviewing one of your clients and uncovering the story, so to speak. What's newsworthy? What's the gem that you, by gut instinct, know that other journalists are going to care about and want to write about?
So a direct answer to that is I don't work with anyone who's not an interesting client. I'm so direct and intentional with how I talk to people that a nickel and dime, boring type person's never going to be my client. My clients are 100% exceptional, visionary, investment mindset folks who are up to some incredible things. So I guess when I first started, it was a little bit different, but again, like as a journalist, like I wrote 2 to 3 stories on deadline every day and was constantly finding, boom, 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 cool story, cool story, cool story, cool story. I mean, that's like a superpower for me. It's super easy. So, I mean, like it's hard to explain my brain in terms of how that works. I just know what a good story is. Like I'm very in tune with things that are not only newsworthy, but things that are clicky and things that the general public will actually care about, just because like that's all I'd ever done my whole life. So like, we were talking about like the difference between, writing stories and pitching them, or like writing in a journalistic way for what I do now. There's really no difference at all, other than there's a little bit of client information blended into the stories. But I only work with people that are involved with similar cool things that I wrote about as a journalist. Like I'm very intentional about that. So, and that's the beauty of being an entrepreneur, like we talked about before. It's just, I get to choose who I want to work with. I say no all the time. So
pick one of them though. Tell me one of them, and like what you found was a interesting story that you got after asking probing questions. Maybe it was 30 minutes into the conversation. You're like, aha, that was it.
It's not 30 usually. So, I always ask people about, their parents. I never come in with like, there's never like questions written down. So it's just like, I don't know, like I could talk to you and then something will just ping in my head. So you're a high fact finder, and I can see how you're a journalist. You're just going to keep asking me the same question if I don't answer it the way that you want me to. So I will try and do that. So there's a guy in Chicago, and he runs like a giant scaling coaching business, which is fine. But I talked to him like, oh, so where'd you come from? He came from Decatur, and his father was an entrepreneur, and he how did you become an entrepreneur? And he ran like a painting business, like a selling painting business, and he failed. Like he was basically about to declare bankruptcy, and I'm like, oh, there you go. That's your story. That's the story that people will be interested in. And then instead of declaring bankruptcy, he created, he became like the number one salesperson with the paint selling business. And then that foundation led to him starting this coaching business, which is now scaling. I think they're at 4 million revenue now. So that's a typical entrepreneurial story. I know there's another woman, Danielle Pierce. She's in the Fort Worth area. She, single mom, 3 kids, and she doesn't come from money at all. Was a caddy on the south suburbs of Chicago, and wound up getting a full with the Evans Scholarship for caddies to the University of Illinois, and that gave her the foundation to create her entrepreneurial dreams. And then she also was terminated from her job, and then she wound up creating a real estate company that I think it was at $750,000 last year, and it's well over $1 million this year. So that's an entrepreneurial story. I can just like figure that out, like what's inspirational, what's emotional, what do people actually care about. And the rule I go by is like, people don't really care about what you do, they care about who you are. But if they care about who you are, they will care about what you do. So people very rarely actually ask me about what I do PR wise. They're really interested about like, how did you start this company? And then they're like, oh, you reached out to 5,000 people to get 5 clients, or like, you don't write anything down. You're able to connect people on a global level, and you're constantly creating these life-changing intros for people. And it's like, that's what life and business are really about. And then the byproduct of that is that I get all these great intros, and my business has exploded. So.
Well, since we're on the topic, I wanted to ask you about that, introductions. I'm as much of a fan of introductions as you are.
Yep.
You introduce 2 people, they hit it off, and they're going to remember you forever. But for those who don't make introductions that often, what advice do you have for them? And do you have any hacks or tips for how to integrate it make it a habit, and why people should do it?
Habit's the right word. I love how you just asked me that in that way. So minimum every day I make 10 life-changing intros. And again, most of my day is talking to people like you. They'll say something, I'll be like, oh, I know someone who thinks the exact same way, or they're involved in businesses that could be, create great synergies, or like I have a client in Utah. She homeschools her 4 kids. And then I was on this call with this 3-time gold medalist softball player, Team USA softball, and she also homeschools her 4 kids. And I just introduced them, and now they're good friends, and potentially doing business together. So like, folks that are like strictly in it for transactional purposes, that's the opposite of my business model and my life model, frankly. What my company is really on a higher level thinking is this giant incubator of geniuses and around the world, and we're constantly introducing each other for mutual gain. And the byproduct is I'm constantly getting interest in companies around the world that want to hire my firm. So on average, like I said, minimum 10 intros a day that I make, and then I receive 3 or 4 minimum really good, high quality, warm intros. And I don't, cold calling and direct reaching out to people. I don't do any of that. I haven't done that in years. And it's really fun to see how it's just the beginning of this. Like, the company's a little over 3 years old, and my 10Xing has nothing to do with revenue. because my company is essentially all profit. Revenue to me is a number driven by ego. It's meaningless to me. Like if you're making 2-3 million in revenue and your profit's 10,000, like, okay, congratulations. So, but my 10X is network on a global level. So as the network just grows and grows and grows, the opportunities for my network grows and grows and grows, and the network and the opportunities for my company and myself grow and grow and grow.
Hopping back into the topic of journalism again, journalism has changed dramatically over the last 20 years. A lot of people blamed Craigslist for hitting classifieds, which was newspapers' revenue source for many years. And then you have social media and things, today, what's newsworthy has changed and evolved. So talk a little bit about, your perception of the news landscape today. There's been, in recent years, there's been, pushback against journalists from the top on down. I think that's unfortunate. Having being the son of a journalist, I was raised with tremendous amount of respect for journalists as a profession. But what are your thoughts on the state of the profession and social media and where it's going in the future?
So in terms of background, like I have a very, very high abundance mindset always. And it's never been a more exciting time, certainly for a business owner like me on the journalism level. And you hit it on the head starting this podcast as mainstream traditional media has started to, go down in certain ways. And there's never been more media to pitch my client stories or myself. And podcasts like this, they're unbelievable. They're not only unbelievable for my business and brand, but then I do a good job on these interviews, and the hosts are like, "Oh, we'd love to have your clients on there," because they're all visionary wackadoos like I am. And these are the
official term, visionary wackadoo.
Oh yeah, I said that all the time. People laugh, but like that's I'm a visionary wackadoo, and like visionary, these visionaries with abundance mindset, they're the ones that are running the best companies in the world, because they're just I'm just coming off the biggest quarter my company's ever had, because these people, they don't look at things as cost, they look at things as investment, and there's no panic. They're just pivoting and creating new things. And
it's great when you find the right clients for you.
On the right tribe. That's it.
When you find the right tribe. Talk about that. You're active in EO. You're also active in Strategic Coach. When did you make the decision to get involved in those two organizations or any other similar types of organizations? And what role has that played for your business?
Life-changing, multiple ways. Again, the company is a little over 3 years old. I was in much lower level, local, mind-numbing, super annoying groups for me. I'm the highest in DISC. I'm like the highest D you can imagine. Boredom to me is worse than death. And I was in these lower level groups. I'm like, what the hell's wrong with me? I'm like,
local networking groups.
Oh, got 'em.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. We don't need to name them, but I have an idea.
Yeah, all right. So
I mean when I was practicing law, I did it, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
God. Yeah, right. You're an entrepreneur who happens to be a lawyer, but
yeah, exactly.
No, I mean I know there's a difference between a lawyer who's a lawyer and an entrepreneur who happens to be a lawyer. So
yeah.
Now you're about the 9th or 10th entrepreneur who happens to be a lawyer I know on a national level. But yeah, so I'm like, what the hell's wrong with me? I'm like, I don't get along with any of these people. That's super annoying. Like, I don't need a painter. And so I have a lot of mentors. One of my first mentors, Kristen Barnett McCarthy. She's an amazing attorney. She was, the president of like the Illinois Women's Attorneys Association. I don't know the exact thing, but she's a great attorney. And I'm like, I can't do any more of these nonsensical networking groups. What's a good group? And she mentioned a group called Provisors, which is a national organization. So they have groups in like LA and San Francisco and Chicago and Boston, and they just open up in like Atlanta and New York and Seattle. And so I've been in that for 2 years, and I was like, oh, okay, there's people that think like me in here. Not everybody does, maybe 10, 15%, but there's enough visionary folks in here where I'm like, oh, I get it. And And so I've been in that at 40 or 50x my investment in that. And then that being in that led me to be in groups like Strategic Coach and EO. And getting in Strategic Coach a year and a half ago, that's what really, really changed my brain from a business mindset and focusing only on my unique ability, which means what I'm really good at and what I like to do. I don't do anything else. A little bit of admin, but basically I just do what I like to do and what I'm good at. And then that led me to EO, which is the greatest global network organization ever. I think there's 14,000 members in the main EO program. Average revenue for companies 5 million. And so most of my conversations now are outside the US. So I'll talk to someone in EO Cape Town or EO Australia, EO Singapore, EO Malaysia, EO Tokyo, EO, Middle East, whatever it is, and EO Toronto. And I'm fascinated by the brains and the folks in these organizations. They're so incredibly smart, and they put their families first, and they're just running up. They have all these, you asked me before about how do I make a boring story cool? Like, none of these people are boring. These are super fascinating people. So it's like, and my brain is just like all the time, and it just never gets boring for me ever. I never get tired of it. So it's really fun.
So then I guess a related question. So I asked you, I asked if, you have boring people, how do you create an interesting story out of it? Mm-hmm. I guess the flip of that is you're talking to interesting people all the time, but they're not your paying clients. Right. But I'm sure you're like, God, this is an amazing story. I want to tell this story. Yep. So what do you do with that itch? How do you scratch it? Or is it just, you get to appreciate it at face value, but you're not going to be writing that story that day. Much like as a journalist, I imagine you came across stories all the time. Your editor was like, I need you to write this story, not that one.
I love the way you ask questions because you think differently than most.
So shared
hosts.
Journalism background.
Yeah, so you ask things in a journalistic, different, organic way. Like, you listen to the guest and then you really analyze it, and then you come up with a creative way of. So that's my journalistic way of responding to your journalistic way of asking me a question. So yeah, if someone's not a paying client, I'm not going to write their story.
Right.
So I just put it off to the side or whatever. But still, for me, just listening are planting seeds, and then finding out what people are up to. I sign a lot of NDAs with folks, and I'm like, and then I have all this incredible knowledge swarming around in my head. It's really fascinating.
Hold on to it for the novel.
Yeah. So that's interesting. Somebody will say something and I'll be like, oh, that's a good idea. That's pretty interesting. And that's the one thing I do write down. So I've my book is 30 things I learned in the company's first 30 months. There was never any intent to write a book, but so now I've started another list of if someone says something cool, I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. That'll be another chapter in the next book. But yeah, believe me, I'm plenty busy and focused on the clients who are paying, and they're up to unbelievable things. But the way my brain never gets tired of hearing fascinating, cool things in the world. My brain is like a sponge. It's just a sponge of, and so I'll go into a room of 20 people, even entrepreneurs, and I'll talk like this, and most of them will think I'm crazy or an alien, and then those people just go away. And then the one or two or three that get it, they'll be like, oh, I love this guy, and they'll introduce me to a million great people, and then they'll become part of my amazing network that grows every day.
It's actually great that you were able to channel some of that energy or that attention or those conversations with interesting people who, weren't a client, but it was an interesting story, and you were able to channel it into the book. Mm-hmm. But what's interesting about the book is that, you do have a PR firm, but the book isn't about PR. No. It's about lessons that you learned. So why that decision to write that book about that topic?
So October 16th, 2019 was the 30-month anniversary of my company. And so at the time, I think I had 37,000 followers on social media. So I posted this list of 30 things that I had learned in the company's first 30 months from some of the top entrepreneurs in the world. And again, there was no intent to write a book. And so everybody saw the list and they're like, oh, you got to write a book on that. So I'm like, okay. So I signed with one of the top micro publishers in the United States. Her name is Rebecca Hall-Greider. She's based out in the Bay Area, San Francisco, and signed with her in late November, wrote the book in 43 days, and just came out in May, and international bestseller in 6 countries, #1 for entrepreneurship in the U.S. and it's just so much fun because it's helped so many people, and it's going to continue to help so many people. And the interesting surprise is that I initially thought, and still do, it's intended for like entrepreneurs or people who are starting businesses. Like, here's how you can spend as much time with your family and do whatever you want and work with only the people you want to and make as much money as you want to. So the interesting byproduct of that is that business owners, CEOs have actually bought the book for their employees to help them think on a global networking level. And to your point earlier, because like I process things, I think the same way you do, like it helps them make habits of creating these intros for people and think like an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur, an employee, an entrepreneurial type employee inside a company. And that's been an interesting byproduct, that it's actually really good for employees as well.
Do you want to highlight any of the particular lessons out of the 30 that are your favorites?
So instead of that, and that's a really good question, I will respond with what folks have told me the most value they've gotten out of it. There's a chapter in there that only work with people who look at things as investments, not costs. And that's the #1 thing people have said, oh man, that's really changed my life. Because anyone who, like I said before, anyone who asks, what do you cost or what do you charge? Certainly within the first 5 minutes, those people are gone. Like, they immediately disqualified for being a client or being in my network. Those folks are toxic for 2 reasons. One, they're going to nickel and dime you with every single negotiation. They're going to be horrible clients because they're only going to be thinking about it in a transactional way as opposed to a relationship way. And then those folks in their network, they usually only hang out with other people like that. So it's double toxic. When someone asks you what does an investment with your firm look like, it's like the greatest question ever, because you know they're serious. One, they don't look at things as a cost, and they realize that they've invested in their own businesses and brands, and that's why their companies are so great, because they don't look at it as a cost. They look at everything as an investment. And so that's what entrepreneurs and other folks have told me has been the #1 lesson that they've learned from the book. The #1 thing that has really helped me is that I realized what my company actually is from writing the book. It's not a PR firm. It's this incubator of geniuses on a global level that keeps growing every single day, and we're always introducing each other for mutual gain.
That's great. I love that. I wanted to ask you about, I've found that I've had to sometimes stop myself from pursuing certain things that I enjoy because it isn't necessarily what I need to do for the business. And so I'm wondering if you've ever found that for yourself. Like, for example, you mentioned you love connecting with other entrepreneurs, love talking to other entrepreneurs, hearing their stories, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I do too. But I also know sometimes, like, instead of doing that, I need to do this other thing. So have you had to temper that inclination, or have you found that just, pursuing those instincts hasn't treated you wrong, or you haven't run into trouble with it?
No, in fact, it's the opposite, because when you spend most of your day having these type of conversations, that's where the byproduct is, that's where you get all these amazing intros, and that's how business is developed. So it's actually the opposite type of thing. I do no reaching out to anyone. I haven't done that in a long time. And because I'm only talking to these awesome people that are introduced to me, then they get it. And so, yes, some of them become clients, but just as important is I create real relationships with them and then make really good intros for them, and then they make really good intros for me. And it just, like I said, it just never stops growing. And so because of strategic coach and focusing on my unique ability, what I like to do and what I'm good at, it's never worked for me. If I didn't have to sleep or be a parent, which I love being a dad and a husband, but I didn't have to sleep or do that, I could literally do this 24/7 and never get tired of it. It fuels my entrepreneurial brain. It fuels my journalism brain, fuels my curiosity brain, fuels my business brain, and fuels my relationship brain. So it's really, I think, the opposite of what you think in that regard, because it actually creates endless business doing these type of conversations.
I don't know if you've done this through EO yet, but did you do Gallup Strengths Finders at any point? I noticed that you on your LinkedIn, you've got your, I believe
Colby
it's
score.
Your Colby score up there. Yeah.
Yep. So I haven't done the Gallup strength thing, but I've done a lot of those self-tests. One of them says boredom to me is worse than death. I'm the highest D you can imagine in DISC. So my Colby score is really rare, but go ahead.
You'll have to do that one, the Strength Finders one, because I did it recently. And the funny thing was they'd emailed out the results beforehand, but I didn't realize that they hadn't seen it or something. And then in the group, everyone who knew me was there, and there was like 30 people or something. And the trainer said, "And John, you're a woo." And I didn't know what that meant. But it turns out it means you really like meeting new people and hearing their stories. And he explained it, and the whole group was just like, "Oh yes, absolutely."
Yeah, of course, makes perfect sense.
And I was pretty much like, "Yeah, that pretty much nails it." Yeah, and so I think you might be a woo as well.
Oh no, one, I'm 100% a woo.
Yeah,
I'm a woo to the millionth degree. Woo, whatever.
I know.
Yeah, but that's great. But see, when you learn about yourself, I'm fascinated by those, and I always tell people about Colby. And that's like
great,
the Bible and strategic coach. And so there's two things. When someone puts their Colby on all their social media platforms, I'm like, oh, this person's definitely a visionary and they definitely get it. It's pretty rare to see that, but that means they're like really into like learning about themselves. So Colby taught me that I'm really rare for an entrepreneur. Like most entrepreneurs have. And in case people don't know about Colby, it's 4 scores: fact finder, quick start, boom, 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 and then follow through, which that's obvious, and then implementer, which is like working with hands. So I'm the really, 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 really rare entrepreneur, based on talking to thousands of people, and only 3 of them had similar Colby scores to me, that I'm high in the first 3. So I'm high fact finder, high quick start. I'm also high follow through. And I'd be a 0 for implementer. If you ask me to like build something, I'll have a nervous breakdown. So most entrepreneurs, again, based on my experience from talking to people all day, is they have very high quick start, boom, 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 and no follow through. That's why they hire a bunch of people, because they have to hire people to follow through on their visionary wackadoodness. I can actually follow through on my own quick start, so I don't need to hire anyone. And that's really rare for an entrepreneur. Because I was a journalist for 20 years, I think I had to have high follow through. It's just part of being a good journalist, asking questions, following through on deadline, or, getting stuff done and keeping track of like talking to people and, editing things. So very rare for an entrepreneur though. Very, very, very rare.
Yeah. Well, this has been great, Justin. Really enjoyed talking to you. And we'll wrap things up with the question I always ask, which is, let's pretend we're at an awards banquet, much like the Oscars or the Emmys. You're receiving an award for lifetime achievement for everything you've done up until this point. What we all want to know is, who do you thank? In addition to family and friends, of course, who are the mentors, who are the friends, who are the peers, who are the editors, who are the publishers, who are the people that you would acknowledge in your remarks?
Wow, there's so many, but Kristen Barnett for sure. She was one of my original mentors. Colin Corbett, he's much younger than me, runs one of the largest political consulting firms in Illinois. He's been a longtime mentor. And Greg Reed, he runs an amazing group called Secret Knock based in San Diego, but has clients all over the world. Gary Klaben, he's a coach within Strategic Coach. And I had been meeting quarterly for lunch with him before COVID, and he's just a tremendous guy. And there's just so many people. And I'm just so thankful because, starting business without having a mentor, most folks don't have mentors when they start businesses, like over 80%. And it's like, that's one of the chapters in my book. Like, please, if you start a business, have some mentors. Like, you're going to need help. It's like, you can't just like magically make this happen. So,
yeah. Well, and that's a skill in itself, to get someone to be a mentor, because oftentimes the worst thing you can ask is, will you be my mentor? But, getting people to provide mentorship. People enjoy providing mentorship. I think just these days, a lot of times people are wary of the commitment, maybe.
I think you're 100% right. And people ask me to be a mentor all the time. I'm happy to provide advice. In terms of like a full scale mentorship thing, I mean, that's not in the cards. But but providing advice, I do that every single day.
Yeah, absolutely. Justin, this has been great. Where can people go to learn more about you, connect with you?
Sure. So more than 40,000 followers on social media. LinkedIn is a good place. There's more than 21,000 followers there. I use that as basically a commercial for other people, and it's led to endless connectivity and awesomeness for folks there. So Justin Breen there. And then my company's site is BrEpicLLC.com. B as in boy, R-E, P as in pony, I, C as in cobra, LLC.com, BrEpicLLC.com. And you can find out how to get the book as well. Here's the actual book, by the way, in case you want to look at it. So
there you go. Epic
there
business.
It is. That's
All right.
it.
All right. Thanks so much, Justin.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
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 And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.